I'm joined today by Marland Lowe, an absolute legend in the grassroots community in Houston and an entrepreneur as well. And Marland, my first question is, have you ever had any personal experience dealing with either unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment or dealing with non-lethal police brutality?
Yes, both. Both. Um, there's been examples. I mean, there's numerous examples, but it just depends on how you look at it. The bottom line is if it was someone other than a black person, they would it would offend them about what happened. But many times as black people, so unfortunately, we've become conditioned to it where we accept things that normally would not be accepted. And we allow ourselves to be more docile in order to be able to get home from that encounter, if that makes sense. I mean, we'll say yes, sir. We'll say no, sir, regardless of whether they deserve that respect or not, because we don't want to have an issue and we want to try to at least allow them to establish some respect, you know?
Yeah, you mentioned normalization and having these conversations with black friends of mine over the years. The Oftentimes I've said, man, have you ever had anything like with the police? Like, have you ever had any types of and sometimes I'll hear like, no, man, I've been lucky. And I'll say, so you've never been pulled over by the police when you weren't speeding and just sort of asked questions like, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Or, what are you doing out this late? Or where are you going? You've never been walking down the sidewalk with a group of your black friends and minding your own business and the cops roll up and start checking IDs. And almost every time they say, oh yeah, that stuff happens all the time.
Right.
So it's like, it's been so normalized that it doesn't even feel, it's like, I've said this before in other interviews, but it's almost like, I don't feel like we should complain about that stuff because people like George Floyd are too dead to complain. It's like a normalization, and it's like survivor's guilt to a certain extent. And so,
right.
And then my next question is, of your, if you want to share one or two of those stories, we would like to hear them. If you don't, that's okay as well. My follow.
Let me see. First one I'll say is first time I ever had a gun pulled out on. First time I seen a gun pulled on anybody, I was think 8 or 9 years old by the police. The first time I had a gun pulled on me, I was 12 years old by the police. The one of the biggest things that stand out to me that I always remember as years got older is when I was the night before my 8th grade graduation. We were riding in a car with my brother and my cousin. We were instructed by my mom to go to the store. We were out. They said, bring some orange juice back. Okay, cool. So we went to the store to get some orange juice. On the way there, we got pulled over and by the cops. And the cops wound up saying, there was a handgun in the car. I'll admit to that. It's a handgun in the car. It was registered. It was official. And once they pulled us over, they put all of us in handcuffs. They separated us. They put me in the back seat of the car. What they tried to do was, and I didn't know what was going on. Obviously, we know it's tactics of what they try to use, but at the time, I wasn't aware of what was going on. But they tried to convince me that my brother and my cousin admitted that they were going to rob the store down the street. They've already said that they were going to rob it. That's why they had that gun. Even though, I said, I don't know nothing about a gun. It wound up being registered later on, but at the time, I don't know anything about a gun. And we weren't going to the store. We were going to get the robbing store was going to get some orange juice and take it home to my mom. And so they kept pressuring me and badgering me, man. It just, regardless of what happened. Long story short.
And you're 14 years old. You're a child when this is happening.
Yeah. I was 14, maybe 13. Yeah, I was 14. Night of my 8th grade graduation, I was 14. I remember like yesterday, I was literally shaking. I was shaking in the car. And they were trying to get me to consistently tell them that my family we were going to rob that store. They wound up taking my brother and my cousin to jail. They both got out the next morning. They released them. And I can't even remember how I got home that night. So that was the first time I remember that that they tried to really set me up to try to say that my family was going to commit a crime.
That's a horrifying story.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
I certainly never. I mean, I've had fracases with the law a number of times, but that's because I was a bad kid. It was. I never just went to the store to get something for my mom, got pulled over, gun drawn, handcuffed, back of the cop car. I've been handcuffed in the back of the cop car, but it was warranted, right? Nobody is saying that if there's a black criminal who's armed and shooting at the police and they shoot back and the black person dies, nobody marches for that, right? Like nobody's complaining about a black person doing 55 and a 35 who gets pulled over, right? Mm-hmm. We're not complaining about that stuff. What we're trying to point out and get white people to understand is that these are persistent issues, and it's bigger than just policing. But these are persistent issues. Right. I've asked these questions to a lot, even before I started doing this interview series. I've had these conversations with black people a lot.
And sirens in the background. Careful.
Yeah. And I have two black friends who are in my approximate age group, like 35 to 55. Two out of 50, 60, 70 who have never had an experience of, at a minimum, being unconstitutionally harassed. Pulled over when you weren't speeding, asked where you're going, all that type of stuff. And so my follow-up is, of your circle of closest black male friends, roughly what percentage of them have had a similar or worse experience of, again, at a minimum, experiencing unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment? Because we talk a lot about Black Lives Matter, and they do. Black rights matter as well. And because black rights don't matter, that creates the cultural foundation that allows black lives not to matter as well. Right. And we as white people don't connect the unconstitutional harassment with the culture that permits the murders. And so we allow ourselves to feel like this problem is isolated, so we can turn a blind eye, be indifferent, and go about our day. So roughly what percent? I know you haven't sent out a formal survey, but.
Man, I can knock it off the head real quick. But what I'll say is, I'll give you this so that you can look it up and everybody can look it up. The U.S. Supreme Court, pursuant to Title VII, it's statistically impossible to be a black male in the United States of America and reach the age of 25 without having been arrested at least once for no cause.
So what you're saying is 100%.
I got that from Judge Joe Brown. Judge Joe Brown.
It's 100%. It is. Yes. So this is, it's a walk down silly street to even ask this question. But again, the point that I'm trying desperately to drive home is to get white people to understand that this is not isolated. And so the silly street question is, do you consider 100% to be isolated or pervasive?
Well, you know what? It's not really a tricky question. It's not isolated for sure.
Right.
It's the culture. It's the culture of the police. It's the culture of the police, which people keep avoiding. And I think it goes back. If you want to talk about where the origins of it, in order to get this as something, you have to go back to the origins of things. And the origins of that starts in the Second Amendment. When they made boys from 16 to 45 years old all arm themselves and be on patrol for black slaves. And since then, they militarized young white males back then. With it was a requirement. It's still in the Second Amendment. You can research it, and then it says that's how the police started. And we know that's how the police started. They called it by another name at the time, Patty Body or something. I can't remember, but they called it a different name. Since then, they felt the right to have a certain attitude towards black people. And then Black people, Africans, and since then it has kind of evolved into the my goodness, what is Donald Trump was telling everybody to send out the all the cities to send out their
National Guard.
it has evolved to the National Guard per se. He said, we're going to send in the National Guard. When the riot starts, the looting starts. I mean, the shooting starts. He was talking about sending in the National Guards. Those police is translated towards the National Guard now, unfortunately. But that's where it all began. And if you don't want to go back and correct the Second Amendment or abolish the way it was and rewrite the laws, then that's what we stand on. And that's why they protect their brotherhood. It was began by that. That's how it was began.
Well, you mentioned that I completely agree. It's critical to connect history to the present because no major historical trend has ever stopped on a dime.
Right.
And racism is clearly no exception to that principle. And you mentioned some interesting points. One, you talked about the Second Amendment and back to Black Rights Matter. You know, when, and you probably already heard this because you read a lot on this subject. Well, in the 1960s, the governor of California was Ronald Reagan, and the Black Panthers had started a self-defense group that I believe they called Cop Watch, if my memory serves, where there were members of the Black Panthers with rifles patrolling Black neighborhoods in Oakland because police brutality against Black people in Oakland, they were not looking to randomly harm people or shoot cops. Right. They were sending the message that you can't do this anymore. The next time you brutalize us, we're going to exercise our God-given right to self-defense. Mm-hmm. Well, as soon as the Black Panthers started that group, Reagan pushed through the Mulford Act in California. California was an open carry state until Black people started exercising their constitutional rights.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you had a problem. And same thing in Chicago, D.C., New York, a lot of the major urban centers where you see too much gun violence, especially in Black neighborhoods. Well, so they all have these laws restricting handguns. Well, again, where's the NRA? Like, why is a local government allowed to take away constitutional right from Black people? And the NRA doesn't seem to care at all. And if you think about it, and you know this, there in Chicago, there are thousands of Black men in jail, not for the crime of using a gun, but for the crime of having a gun. And how can you bear an arm if you can't have one? It's a flagrant constitutional abuse. And then the last thing is,
well, to your point on that, before you go to the last point, is there's a lot of Black people in Chicago locked up frivolously for and they didn't even have a gun. The rules have been set up in a certain way that just, you can go down the street at any point in time on the south side or the west side of Chicago. At one point in time, it was 60% of the Black males in those neighborhoods had felony convictions. And as you know, a convicted felon is not supposed to hang with another convicted felon. So if it's 60% of the males in those areas that have been released, and take in mind that Chicago is probably the most segregated city in the United States. Where else are those men supposed to go? So if you ride down the street at any point in time, you're going to find some of those guys hanging out with each other. And then right away, guess what? They broke a violation and they can be locked up again. And that's just that's just how the laws have been set up to be able to be by the police and the district attorneys to be able to enforce those things, to be able to keep people off the streets. And so that's the tough thing about that. And then as another point that you made was about I'm sorry, I can't remember, but you take for example, wanting Chicago and Minnesota and Minneapolis, all these, they're democratic cities. First of all, you just got to admit that. And then you talk, what people don't talk about when they talk about, always talk about Tulsa, Black Wall Street, the Tulsa massacre, what happened, how they came in and destroyed the town. People forget to talk about, or they don't even teach about Rosewood, the Rosewood massacre, what happened there, the Lane massacre in Arkansas, the Slocum massacre in East Texas, the Ocoee massacre in Florida, and the Orangeburg massacre in South Carolina, right? Nobody talks about this, and it's everything has been about something happened, so we went in and we killed everybody there. These massacres were worse than some of them were worse than Wall Street and Tulsa. And the biggest thing that they did was they came in, they killed people, they took their land, and by the authority of the state, they took over. They took the land. So all these black people, they took all the land. So a lot of these places around where we look at, that's stolen land, man. And so these are things that people don't even talk about. It's not taught in school, but if you don't learn how to read and research, you just never know. So that's the nature of it, is the fact that when they come in and they take your land. You look at some of these places where they talk about gentrification they begin sometimes by raising the taxes. Well, first of all, unfortunately, black people aren't teaching their kids how to pay taxes to make sure that they keep their land. But they raise the taxes so high that some people can't afford them. And what that is to push you out. So I moved around a little bit, Pete. I'm sorry, but let's go back to your point.
Well, you brought up a lot of interesting points, and first thing I want to say is to any white people watching, Marland Lowe believes in self-education and self-betterment for black people. And it's his right as a black man to try to mentor other younger black people. But I don't want any of you white people watching to hear him say that and cling to it and say, you see, that's the real problem. Because our fight as white people has to be against racism. That's the variable that we can control. Mm-hmm. We can check ourselves on the topic of racism. We can check other white people. We can make sure that we use our vote to try to promote candidates that are really intending to be in the fight. But it's not our job to always deflect away from our racism by pointing to instances of black behavior. Right?
And at the same time, Pete, it's not always your fault. Black people we have to accept a lot of responsibility in this. But it goes back to what I just said before, when they talked about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So what happens if you don't have boots? Okay. But not only that, but when we did pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, i.e. Tulsa, Rosewood, Elaine, Slocum, you came and burnt it down. You came and destroyed what we had, and you took the land. Why? We did that, and we were self-sufficient. These places were self-sufficient. Fayetteville, North Carolina. Look at what happened there. They have I think David West put out something on Fayetteville, North Carolina talk about what happened. But that's the thing about it. Anytime we do something positive where we become independent and not needing anyone else, they come in and destroyed what we had and killed it, and then took what we had and expect us to continue to just accept it.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because this brings us back to a conversation we've had before on the summer podcast. Mm-hmm. Because white people love to say, well, what happened in Tulsa in 1919 was awful, but that was a long time ago. Right. Well, a couple of things. One, it's important for white people to understand that when land is stolen, land is the basis of white wealth. And if we systematically refuse to allow black people to own land, and when black people did own land, we did whatever we could to take it away, well, there was really no possibility for black people to build sustainable wealth, and we did it on purpose. And the truth is, the first generation of mass black homeowners hasn't even passed away yet. The first generation of any meaningful level of black inheritance hasn't even occurred yet because we didn't allow black people to be property owners. To this day, Bank of America got fined $335 million in 2011 because equally qualified black and white borrowers were being treated grossly unequally across the board. And so the white people who want to say it's a long time ago understand this. In grassroots basketball, the NCAA and USA Basketball, the two white-controlled organizations, they look at someone like Marland Lowe, who's building something good and sustainable in Houston, and it makes them very uncomfortable. Grassroots basketball is an emerging black power structure. The NCAA and USA Basketball are long-standing, existing white power structures. And the existing white power structures are doing what they always do, which is put their foot on the neck of the black power structure that's trying to emerge because they view it as a threat. So not just black, but the majority of grassroots coaches are black. And grassroots coaches, to coach at an NCAA event, have to have a USA Basketball certification. Okay, well, there's no certification for grassroots volleyball coaches.
Right.
There's no certification for grassroots softball coaches. There's no certification for grassroots anybody, just basketball. And to think it's a coincidence that grassroots basketball, of all the other sports that I just mentioned, is the only black-dominated power structure. To think it's a coincidence that that's also the only one that the NCAA and USA Basketball are combining to police, if you will. Of course it's not a coincidence.
Right.
And these people are deliberately disrupting the natural emergence. Of course there should be black-dominated power structures in basketball where the vast majority of the best players are black. Right. And then a couple other things you mentioned. You talked about the history. And again, it's so important for white people to understand how it ties together. But every white person believes they would have been marching with King in the 60s, right? But it's really important to understand that when Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised the Black Fist in '68, that was, I believe, the year that MLK was murdered. And white America the Olympic Committee kicked him out, blackballed. Most of white America was either, respect the anthem, respect the flag, or the moderates would say, well, I understand why they're upset, but that's not the right platform. That's the Olympics. That's supposed to be a time of, that's not the right platform. And of course, there's never a right platform. The goalposts are going to keep getting moved. But then you look at Colin Kaepernick when he took a knee. What happened? Blackballed. He's disrespecting the anthem. He's disrespecting the flag. He's done, And then some people said, well, I respect his right to do it, but it's not the right time. Sports are a unifier. Right? And so I just need white people to accept that we have not changed anywhere near as much as we like to give ourselves credit for.
Right.
Let's truly change our own hearts and minds, and then start patting ourselves on the back. We're essentially celebrating in the 100-yard race at the 20-yard mark. We have a lot of work to do. And then the last thing before we'll move on to you talked about black families, okay? And God, white people love to say the real problem in the black community is the absence of black fathers. Right. White people love to say that. And
they are correct.
But it's important to note, Marlon, that again, you can speak to any issue about black people in any way you damn well please. It is not my job to talk to black people. Okay. It is my job to talk to white people and to myself to try to get to self-correct. Right.
And to share amongst each other, but I get it.
And so for you to take the stance that the out of wedlock birth rate in the black community is a problem is fine, because you're not saying that as a way to say racism doesn't exist. Right? When white people say it, it's to be like, well, I'm saying racism is a problem. You go, no, it's not. It's the absence of black fathers, right? That's the reason that white people say it, which is not the reason you say it, right?
Right.
But you look at during the institution of slavery, black families were deliberately broken up, deliberately,
Absolutely.
because the enslavers wanted the primary identity to not be member of a family, but to be enslaved. They believe slavery would be more functional if the primary identity of the enslaved human beings was the fact that they were enslaved rather than the family. So they deliberately broke up families regularly. And then you look at the mass incarceration, it's like, well, that specifically targets black people, especially black men. And it's like, so if 100% of black men by the age of 25 are going to be arrested at least once frivolously when they haven't done anything wrong,
Mm-hmm.
well, so we're putting black men in prison grossly disproportionately with much longer sentences. And so it's like, well, where are all the black fathers? Well, they're in prison because of your blatantly racist law enforcement systems, right? So I literally have zero problem with you look at Malcolm X. We're going to clean out the pimps and the alcohol I don't have any problem with Malcolm X saying that.
Right.
As he tries to lead black people to lead the best life possible in America. I have no problem with you being disappointed in any black friends of yours or black people who are not really pulling their own weight as a father. I don't have a problem with you discussing that. I have a problem with white people using that to try to move the conversations away from the part of the equation that's actually on us, which is we're the ones who have implemented and perpetuated racism. Right. And so so it's very disingenuous when white people go down that road. And so it pisses me off. But anyway, that was the last point I had.
Okay.
So now, the floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you again. I think that you have to go back and you look at back in the 60s and 70s when they started. You take the Homestead Act, for example, set up for white people. They moved black people out, moved projects and everything else. When they started talking about Social Security, government subsidizing in home ownership and in the projects when you're able to get cheap rent, a lot of that allowed a black woman to have those incentives of being able to live inside of a home or a housing unit as long as the male was not there. So if you don't have if a man and a woman are together and the man is not able to get a job to be able to sustain, to be able to provide for his family because of whatever situations, he may have been a convicted felon, which now makes it even harder for him to get a job. But if he's with this woman now and they don't have a place to stay and he's not able to earn enough income, it was motivation to her. It was basically saying, listen, it was an incentive to her to listen, we can get you into these housing projects or into these units is for you and your child, so long as the father is not there. And that's how a lot of people don't even realize that, but that's how a lot of families started being broke up. Man and woman, they're not together. And so they incentivize these women to be able to be without the male a lot of times in order to be able to have some perks of living with some reduced rent and things of that nature. So that goes a long way back by itself. And even going back to chattel slavery is when when they removed the male. And not only did they remove the male from the house, what they did was they would beat him in front of everyone, in front of the other slaves, males and females, in order to show them what could happen to them. And then they would sometimes they killed the male. And what that did was, as a black woman and as a mom, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do everything that you can to protect your child. So what they did was they began, it wasn't intentional, but it was about trying to move for survival. What they did was they started saying to them, hey, don't look at him in his eyes. They tell their son, don't look at him in his eyes. Hey, when Mr. Charlie come, say yes, sir. Say no, sir. Hey, turn and go away. If he comes over here, do that, turn and walk away. Put your head down and walk the other way. They did that. So they made their own child to be docile and to be accepting of whatever behavior that could come to them in order to make sure that that child lived. And that's fine by a parent. But if that father was there, the father is going to show that man, that child, how to be strong, to defend his family, to protect his family, and how to support his family. And all of that was taken away by the way that that system and that structure was put in place. So it continued as we go. And as you talked about college basketball, it remains in that system as well, unfortunately. I was on a very good show the other night with Brian Burton. They had a strong podcast, a Zoom call, and they had about 150 people on there, 140 people on there. It was really good. Black, white, and even some trainers. And it talked about just the system and what's going on right now, how people can unite. And it was 4 hours long, Pete. Started at 8 o'clock, ended at 12 a.m. I waited for 3 hours, and it was some very good information out there. But one thing I saw was this. A lot of the coaches on there, black and white, they were being politically correct. They weren't talking about the system that's in place to keep these guys, to keep everybody down. And that kind of, I was respectful because I still wanted to take something out of it, and I took a lot out of it, but I was kind of up. It was disappointing to me that people were being politically correct overall because they didn't know who all was on there. But that whole 4 hours, I never heard Merle Cole's name brought up. I never heard Chuck Person, Andre McGee, Book Richardson, Lamont Evans, Tony Bland. I never heard any of those guys' names brought up, not one time. And with that being said, it's like I wound up talking about it. Like, why? This is the system we're talking about. Why these names didn't get brought up? Because these guys are a direct reflection of this system. These guys did prison time. Why? And the people who are at the head, their bosses, are still on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. And so I said, if you want to talk about reform and talking about breaking a system, why would you not? Nobody talked about this. And so, some people say, because they said they got it from another coach on another Zoom call, that said that it's not a black or white thing, it's a right or wrong thing. I get that. But again, I had to tell them, with all due respect, I have nothing to lose by this because I don't want to be a college coach. The biggest thing I have to lose is if hopefully I got 3 young sons that's coming up, and hopefully by my words, y'all won't decide not to recruit them because I'm trying to be honest with you. Hopefully if they're talented enough, I hope that you'll still recruit them. So I had to put that out there, but it's like, it's a black right thing. It's a right or wrong thing, but it is a black and white thing. As I talk about who owns the media on television, not black people. TV, radio, white people. Who runs college basketball? Who lost their jobs? I'm giving them different things to say. Who's paid the most? Why is it that a black coach can't retweet some things I might put on Twitter because he's nervous about whether his AD, who's white, or his president is white, may not support what he's doing? A retweet that basically is talking about his nationality, support for his nationality, support for his people, but he has to always look over his shoulder to wonder if somebody's watching him. And then what I did not ask, but I wish I would have, it says, let's talk about this. So if it's not a right or wrong thing, and I say this is a black and white thing also. So let me ask you this. If a college coaching position came open at a school that borders Texas, let's put it like that, and if another college position came open at a school that borders California, both of those schools had guys that were terminated, maybe. If these coaches offered a position for you, if we're going to talk to white guys, if you're talking about doing the right thing, and these coaches, would you submit your resume? I didn't ask them that, but I thought about that afterwards. Would you submit your resume? Yeah. Why? Why would you submit your resume? And I would ask the black coaches also, why would you submit your resume? Because the first thing you think is it's a pay raise. It's a grade up, you know, and you think about what I can do more for my family. So if you're going to submit that resume and it's about a pay raise, then what you're saying is capitalism is more important to you than right or wrong. And, you know, I didn't get a chance to say that, but that's just something I thought about right off I got with them. It's like, you guys know that these other black coaches were fired and for doing their job, basically. The guys who were at the top, even caught on tape, heard multiple times, are still fine. And I'm not saying anything about they should lose their jobs either. I wish these other guys could get their jobs back. But, you know, we're just talking about systems across the board. And it was just something it just hit me. But I enjoyed the conversation with those guys. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, you mentioned multiple things that are important. The one that stands out to me the most is that I need white people to understand that righteousness is not zero sum. And Marland said it exactly right. He doesn't want Andy Enfield to get fired. He wants Tony Bland to get his damn job back. Right? We're not no one is trying to make life harder for white people.
Right.
We're trying to make life fair for black people, as the Constitution of the United States specifically guarantees.
And Pete, I don't want to cut you off, but I always have to be careful with people when they say fair. Use the word fair because I like that. And people say, what's fair? I'm going to tell you what fair is. Fair is what's needed. That's the definition of fair. Fair is what's needed. Somebody has a handicap sticker. You don't have one. Why do they have a handicap sticker? Because it's needed. So you can't say that that's not fair for you. It's fair. Fair is what's needed. So when, please continue, but so people need to understand that when you say fair, fair is what's needed. And when you need something to be corrected and fixed, you have to do things differently.
That's a great definition. I never heard that before. But no, I was actually pretty much finished. I just wanted to make that point that, because like white people always feel like they're taking everything away from us. No, nobody's trying to take anything away from you. We want an identically qualified black borrower to get the damn loan at the same interest rate. We're not trying for the identically qualified white borrower to get screwed at a higher rate. We're not calling for that.
Right.
I don't know anybody who wants that. We're simply calling for the equal opportunity and equal protection under the law. And there are people who desire equality, but I'm kind of on. Have you ever listened to Dr. Jordan Peterson?
Not offhand. I can't recall. I may have, though.
You would find him fascinating.
Okay.
He says a lot of things that I can't rock with, but he's a fascinating person.
Okay.
He can present ideas I disagree with in a way that's so logically sound that it at least makes me think about my own views. He talks. Well, just do a YouTube search.
You say Tony Peterson. I'm typing it in now.
Jordan
Peterson. I'm typing it in now. So yeah, okay.
With Joe Rogan are fascinating.
Okay.
He talks about how the doctrine of equality is problematic because it misses on so many other important issues. Like personal freedom, right? You can't have exactly equal representation in every single department because you might have more white men who want to be truck drivers and more black men who want to be high school teachers and basketball coaches, right? So to literally mandate exact equal representation inside every field probably creates more problems than it solves, or at least arguably. But the doctrine of equal opportunity, which is that if two identically able and qualified people pursue the same job, race should not exclude one group. And you see look at the percent of black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Mm-hmm. It's hard to find one. Look at black university presidents at the Power 5 level. Like, you almost can't find one. Well, there were undoubtedly well-qualified black people who applied for those positions. And yet somehow, some way, you sort of continually see, oh, what do you know? Another 62-year-old white man. Like who saw that hire coming? And, mm-hmm. I talked about this a couple episodes ago because you're a very solution-oriented person. And I am too. There's 80 plus pages of solutions in my book. And I'll give you a stat. You might know the stat because, again, you read about this stuff as much or more than anybody I know. But if it's a black defendant and a jury of 12 people has one black person on it, the conviction rate is 99%. If the jury has 3 black people on it, the conviction rate's 92%. And what's important here is that for the white people watching to understand is it is so hard for the one black person in the room, if there's only one, to speak up without being branded as a troublemaker or an agitator. And so the one black juror will say, hey, wait a minute, reasonable doubt, like the eyewitness testimony got destroyed by the defense attorney. Like, I'm not sure this guy did it. And all the other 11 white people go, oh, stop playing the race card. You're sticking up because he's black. Blah, blah, blah. But then with juries with 3 people, 3 black people say, this isn't right, and here's why. And then they can have a voice because there's strength in numbers. Uh-huh. And it also refutes this silly idea that is deeply ingrained in the brains of white prosecutors and judges that black people want dangerous black criminals on the street. No, y'all don't.
Right.
It's like the idea that like a black juror will not will not vote to convict a black defendant who has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt is hogwash. Right. Y'all don't, regardless of race, y'all are just the same as the rest of us. We don't want dangerous criminals who are out there harming innocent people on the street. Right. So one of the solutions I'd love to see is universities have hiring committees with at least 25% black people in the sports where the athletes are almost all black. Mm-hmm. Or maybe not almost all, but where the majority of student athletes are black, and that's football and basketball. These hiring committees need a minimum of 25% representation of black people, because invariably it's the one black assistant AD with 5 white assistant ADs and the white AD. Mm-hmm. And the one black voice to those white people just ends up sounding like noise. Of course he's pushing the black candidate. You know how they are. They like to versus if you have 8 people in a room and at least 2 or 3 of the people in on the decision are black, then I think that black candidates are going to get a radically more fair chance.
Right. So I agree.
That was just on my mind, but
no, I agree. And it's interesting to me because as a lot of these things are continue to be talked about, and people will be making some changes and trying to add certain people into the conversations. I told somebody one time, I said, listen, add my name. Just add me in. What kind of experience do I need? I don't have a PhD. I have a Bachelor of Science, but I don't have a PhD. I'm not a doctor. I'm not but guess what? I know life. I know a lot. I've got some experiences. I tell people, add me. I'd love to be a part of some of these new boards or new things that's being done, because I don't anticipate myself being chosen. See, that's the thing what we got to talk about also, Pete, is a lot of these leaders and these people who are on television respectfully that are speaking on behalf of black people. They're not chosen by black people. They're chosen by the establishment. So they're not speaking on our behalf. They don't know anything about what we want, but they are put in front of everybody because they're paid by the organization who's running things, whatever network and is pushing the agenda. So that's just kind of how I my thoughts is when they continue to move forward and put these different people in place, they'll put people in place that are their guys who are company men, black company men or black company women, who they aren't afraid to rock the boat, and they eventually won't get anything done. They'll side, hey, I need you to vote for us, and they'll side for it because they won't fight for the little men or for the people who, I wouldn't even say the little men, they won't fight for the people who really need fairness. They need what's fair. And so that's my a small worry and concern of mine as we go through this reordering of things and adding this and adding that. I just don't want any symbolic victories. I'm not into the symbolism. We need some tangible items, and we need people that not just are on boards, but have a voice and can make things happen. And it's not always about somebody that can raise money. So, that's just my thoughts on that as we continue to talk. And I agree with all. I enjoy it, man. And I'm gonna tell you this. I meant to tell you this a long time ago, man. I can tell that you've been losing weight, man. You're looking really good, man. Your shoulders are slimmed down, man.
Thanks.
I can say I see a little bit inside your shirt, man. I said, look at Pete. All right, man.
Hey, we I have been. Thank you, and to be to make sure that we're using the correct words. I would say that I look less awful, not good.
I'm okay with that. I'm not too far from you, Pete. I get that.
No, well, I mean, you know how it is when you're we both grew up in Houston, and we both grew up hooping all day, every day. And so, yeah, you can slam a triple Whataburger with bacon and cheese and a big ass Coke and an order of fries all day, every day. But when you're not out there hooping all day, that shit catches up with you.
It will.
And I know that. How are you doing physically, by the way? I know you ripped up the Achilles a while ago.
I'm doing fine. Appreciate it. I've been eating well. Just started back a good exercise regime just probably last week, and I'm just moving forward. I'm feeling good about things, and even with that being said, when we start talking about the media, we're going through a lot of things in our country right now as far as talking about COVID-19. And I'll tell you what bothers me a lot about the media as well. As much as they talk about these deaths and try to scare the hell out of everybody, why aren't they talking about ways to stay alive? Why are they not talking about eat properly, drink a gallon of water a day, eat fruit and with seeds in it, cut out the starches. It's going to help increase your immune system. You need to get your metabolism rate back up. See, these are the things that people need to hear that's going to help them to understand vitamin D is important. Go outside and sit in the sun about the first 20, 30 minutes of the day if you can. But nobody's talking about that. That's these news networks. They just put this fear up inside of you, man, and they can control you. Man, it makes me nervous, man. It doesn't make me nervous. It disappoints me because so many people are being controlled and manipulated by that. And I thought the news would be for somebody to help us to understand what we need to do. You're supposed to be for us and telling us, but you're not. So I know that's a different topic, but
no, it's interesting
about health and body. I just wanted to bring that up.
Do you watch Bill Maher much or ever?
I do watch Bill Maher.
So Bill Maher's on that.
He's slippery too, man. He's slippery. He's really slippery, man.
But even when he goes, because he says a lot of shit that I find to be, if not racist, racially insensitive.
Right.
If not homophobic, insensitive to the LGBT plus community. If not sexist, insensitive to women. And so he does cross the line a lot. What I like about him is that he tries to call it as he sees it. And so he does say that, that, hey, if you're really worried about COVID, find a fucking treadmill. Like that, like he'll say shit like that, and it's like, hey, the old I think it was a Chappelle skit when keeping it real goes wrong.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes when he keeps it real, it goes wrong.
But it's true, and it's funny. People think he's joking, but if the news said the same thing, it would be great.
Yeah, I agree. And what about Joe Rogan? Do you watch his podcast
I
much?
got his podcast. Joe Rogan's pretty good. I don't watch it all the time, but depending on who he has on there as guests, I listen. Even people that I don't know, I like listening to people that I don't know as
He's
well.
a good. I mean, he also like he definitely says things almost every show that make me cringe.
No question. No
But I think
question.
he's the best interviewer out there right now because he doesn't wait to talk.
Yeah.
He listens and then engages from there.
Yeah. He gets it out of you.
Incredible guess. He gets.
Yeah. I like the one with Elon Musk, man. I thought that was interesting to me.
There's another outside the box dude that has me going, oh.
Elon Musk was very insightful, man, and you know while they're there, they're smoking and they're getting high, right? So
Yes.
it's funny, but I heard some things from that interview that just not. It made me think about what's really going on in this world. You know, really go when he started talking about. I'll tell you, I'll put it together. When he started talking about brain implants and trying to, I just, it's like, who are they using to study that on?
The facial recognition shit scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, and that's all over China. And I think a lot of that has to do with this new, when they start talking about that 5 and then the letters, that's about the 8th or 9th letter of the alphabet. You know what I mean?
I need to ask you a question that puts you on the spot. And so, worst case scenario, if you can't answer it right now,
okay.
When I tweet this out, reply with like some, But I find myself I love Stokely Carmichael,
mm-hmm.
James Baldwin, Malcolm
mm-hmm.
X,
mm-hmm.
Paul Robeson, and I love, but a lot of their words can't be as persuasive to the white people who need to be persuaded because they get to just say, well, that was in the 50s and the 60s.
Right.
Like that was a long time ago. Who are some of the thought leaders younger thought leaders active today that you'd like people to know about and like to tell me about so I can look more into them?
Man, I'll give you a list. I think I might have a few right here. I got them on my head, but hell, I ain't gonna be able to find it enough time. But some of the black thought leaders, man, a black woman, Cynthia McKinney, man. Oh, Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. She is special. I think she ran for it. Was it back in 2012, 2016, whatever? 2012, 208. She ran for the president of the presidency in the Green Party. She's phenomenal, right? She's phenomenal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I thought it said something about my internet, but she's phenomenal. Dr. Claude Anderson wrote some bills. He was with Strom Thurmond years ago out in Carolina, and he negotiated through politics with Strom Thurmond to elect 4 black federal judges, like three of the 4 black federal. He's still working today for reparations. He's got a lot of things in the court system. He's phenomenal. He's a lot older right now, and he's one of our elders. But people need to be aware of him. And man, you know what? Nobody's ever asked me this question before, man. And it's like so now you want me to tell you? I'll tell you some of the people that I really follow, and I kind of call it respectfully the black media. That's what I call my black media. But Anthony Browder, he's a guy about
how do you spell Browder? Sorry to interrupt.
Browder, Browder.
Okay.
He's a Egyptologist. He's an Egyptologist, and he studies history of the world, and he is phenomenal. I listened to Thomas Sowell. Oh, Republican. People don't like him if he's a Republican, but black man, he's one of those smartest guys that I've come across. I listened to I watched Curtis Schoon. He's on he's got a Twitter feed. He has a YouTube channel already. It's called Scoon TV at Scoon TV. He's got a movie that he dropped that was called Black, White, and Blue. It talks about, if you have a chance to see it, Pete, Black, White, and Blue is phenomenal. It talks about politics on both sides. It is awesome, man. Like, I mean, seriously, like, if you get a chance to see it, download that and watch it. Tariq Nasheed, I listen to Tariq Nasheed. He's a controversial figure that people kind of like and don't like. I listen to James Small. There's a brother named Irritated Genie I listen to. Let me see. Another sister, she's on the African continent. Her name is Dr. Moombi. I can go on and on, Pete, but if you want me to give you some more names, I can go, man.
Yeah, no, I'm let's stay in touch about this because.
Oh, there's another sister too. She's into politics. She's on Fox a lot. Her name is Teslin Figaro. I tell people a lot of times, go on and listen to Teslin Figaro. Her thing is she's gonna give it to you straight shot, no chaser. She gives it to you. She doesn't pick a side. She's from Cleveland. She's from the hood. She's been around gang members all her life, but she's intelligent. She's intellectual, and she puts things out there. The same as it's another sister named Vicky Dillard Crow. So it's a host of them, man. And so I have a great time on my selections when I want to listen to.
Well, I intend to go follow those folks on Twitter.
Yeah.
And the only there's Coates. Is it Tanasi Coates? I always
Ta-Nehisi Coates, yes.
I like him a great deal. I like Michael Harriot a great deal. But when I make the list of Black civil rights leaders, invariably my own list is like 90% people who are dead. And I just know that, like, Harriot did a long Twitter thread on the sanitization of Martin Luther King for white people's comfort. And it was a wonderful, I sent it to, I've got white friends that are across the spectrum in terms of their level of, I think that every white person is a racist, at least to some extent. I include myself in that. There's just a scale, 1 through 10, right? So I sent that thread to a good 10 or 12 of my white friends who were in that moderate realm. They're 4s, 5s, and 6s on the scale. And it really just blew them away. And so but I know that, again, if it's not contemporary, then it's just too easy for what we want to do as white people is dismiss this and pretend it doesn't happen anymore, because if we admit it still happens, then we have to see ourselves as direct participants in it. And we don't want to do that. Like, for us to say that Jim Crow was wrong, well, to accept that things are still wrong today is to admit that we're wrong. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation.
It is.
For white people to have. But so I'm gonna go follow those. Dr. Derwin Gray, are you familiar with him?
Yes, I've heard the name.
So a white friend of mine who's a strong Christian that we've been engaging quite a bit lately, where he's about to fall off the fence onto the side of the good guys. He keeps being like but why do they have to burn and loot? And so I say, well, one, if we're standing on a street corner next to each other and you flick me on the ear and I say, hey man, don't do that. And you flick me on the ear again and I say, hey man, don't do that. Like, about an hour later, after 50 or 60 or 70 times of me saying, hey man, don't do that, well, eventually I might clock you in the head. Well, that would be your fault, not my fault, right? And so and that's like fucking 2% of the protests devolved into something else. Like, I saw videos of a proper riot. There was not a protest anymore. I saw video of arson and looting. Of course, a lot of the looting was by white people too, which of course certain news networks don't tend to cover that as much. But the vast majority of the protests could not. You'd be a propagandist and a liar to refer to them as anything other than a protest. But he's like the, the classic, like, why did they, it's almost like I was just about to be supportive and then they burned a building and now I just don't know how I feel anymore. And, it's like that's to me the white moderate. Did you see the video of the black woman beating up the white woman who called her the N-word?
Yeah, I saw it last night. Saw it last night.
So on the scale, right, the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s are furious at the black woman. Animal, thug, violent, send her back to Africa, right? And then the 4s, 5s, and 6s are like, that white woman was terrible, to use that word. But why did the black woman have to resort to violence, right? And so that's the moderate. And then the 1s, 2s, and 3s are like, hit her again.
Right.
Well, there aren't enough 1s, 2s, and 3s. The vast majority of white people are 4s, 5s, and 6s. The vast majority are moderates. And that's really kind of my mission is to I need the moderates to know the shit's not isolated.
I agree.
It's pervasive, because I really feel if I can convince with lots of help, like I keep hoping that some prominent person with millions of followers will pick the project up and run with it and make it their own. I don't care whose name is on it.
Right.
If white moderates can be convinced to open their eyes enough to look and see that police misconduct toward black people and American misconduct toward black people, that the shit is not isolated. It's ongoing. It's pervasive. Mississippi State Supreme Court in 2007 ordered a study and discovered that they were still, in 2007, 21 years after Batson versus Kentucky, declared it unconstitutional to whitewash a jury with a black defendant. It was still rampant. And anyone listening who's white, well, that's Mississippi. No, bullshit. Every time they do an academic study on this topic, it's Long Island, it's Pennsylvania, we too often like to imagine that this is a regional problem. People in Portland, well, that doesn't, or Denver. Oh, that happens in Alabama. It doesn't happen. No. Talk to black people who live in Portland and Denver. It fucking happens there too. Believe it, Right. So anyway.
It just, it's again, it's the system. People don't talk about, to me, local voting for black people especially should be non-negotiable. You can miss the presidency, but if you miss local voting, you're getting the district attorney there. That's who's giving your child all these years. That's who's making him take the plea bargain, the plea deals. You vote, the judges, you got the wrong judge. You need to vote. You're voting on certain judges. And so by local voting, which happens like every 2 years, people are missing out on that. It's never been a high priority. And I think that's where a lot of times where we're missing the ball ourselves. When you go back to Dr. King and how he was killed, one thing that it kind of goes back to when I told you about the Tulsa, not about the Tulsa, but I told you about all the black massacres. And if people don't realize how many massacres there were, just Google black massacres. Just hit that black. Oh, you'll see a ton, and then read what happened. But Dr. King being killed, and it goes back to when they came and took all the land and things of that nature. It goes back to say this: black people, anytime they get somebody that they feel like can lead them and help them, for some reason or another, they wind up being killed. The people that black people feel like they can follow and they enjoy, they wind up being incarcerated or they're being killed. Malcolm X is different. It was done by us more likely, so what it appears. Some might disagree. And that's why I kind of tell you when I spoke earlier, I'm always cautious about who I see on television. Who's speaking for me? Who put him there? Who put her there? Who's paying them? So that's kind of what I watch when I think. I just kind of look at things a little differently, and I'm always open to learn, man. I tell you that. I'm always open to learn, and I can learn from anybody, a child, a grown-up, a black person, a white person. The conversation is always good, just like when we always have conversations. It's fun, it's intriguing, it's entertaining, it's insightful. Hopefully it's informational to people as well. But but we got to, in order to move forward, we got to face life. We got to face facts. And, you know, a lot of things systematically have been taken from us, and people have been taken from us just because they disagreed or they talked about self-empowerment, self-improving. And when we continue to talk, the thing I would ask, like, if everybody says they want to make a difference, like, are you really willing to take less in order to let somebody else catch up to where you are? Are you really willing to take less in order to let others who have been prohibited the most catch up to where you are? That's a question I have for people. Since since they say, yeah, I'll do what I need to do. Okay. Okay.
Well, the interesting thing about reparations to me, that most white people, I'd love to see a poll now. I bet that topic has shifted as much as 12 to 15% in the past 6 weeks. But historically, topic of reparations are supported by a very, very, very slim minority of white people. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that we, as a society, as a white dominated society, we made black people poor on purpose, and we kept black people poor on purpose. And on the topic of reparations, my starting point, because I do believe in political pragmatism, is we got to go back to the Montgomery GI Bill, because that was after World War II. That was not written racistly on paper in a vacuum. That was a racially neutral program, but the implementation of it was gross. Like, for example, and I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but there's basically 500,000 government-backed mortgages issued to white World War II veterans in New York alone, and under 1,000 to black veterans. And so it was like the bank essentially said, I don't care if the government backs this loan or not. You're black, and we're not fucking lending you money. So you talk about property ownership. Same thing with the universities. Well, there were only a handful of universities that would accept black students. And so on paper, the government would pay for it, but first you got to find a school that'll let you in. And there weren't any. And the banks wouldn't lend the black colleges money to expand, build additional housing, and so on and so forth. So that would be my starting point, because I think politically we can get that through. We're talking about fucking over World War II veterans, right? And then I would look at education during segregation. Like in Mississippi, they spent something like 28% of the funds on black schools as white schools. So I would say, not by taking money from the white school, but a separate appropriation, right? So it used to be that a black school got X, a white school got 3X. And that was about 75 years of time. So for the next 75 years, I'd make sure the black schools get 3X. And again, I'm not talking about taking money from the white schools. I'm talking about a separate appropriation. And then, now that we got the palette prepared, then we do large cash, real reparations over the course of, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, something like that, based on slavery and based on plunder and based on Tulsa and based on all of the other massacres that you mentioned. But WW2 would be my starting point, just because politically I believe that's actually feasible.
I get that.
So,
and again, when we start talking about the police, what we initially started about, it's got to go all the way back to the Second Amendment. People have to break that down and see exactly what it is. I actually sent you something. You'll get a chance to see this. Richard Rothstein, when he talking about segregation and what they did, and how they moved black people out of their homes and into projects, how they denied them loans, how they moved white people out of the projects and into brand new houses. And some of the
At first, I could hear your voice, but you'd frozen, and then
Oh,
nothing.
yeah. I was just talking about the. Since you check out something on Richard Rothstein, talking about he's the author of The Color of Law, a forgotten history of how American government segregated America, and he talked about just the housing, how they moved white people out of projects into homes. They moved black people out of homes into the projects. In the paper, in the written language that's still in those contracts today, it says, "Do not sell to a black person. Do not let a black person come into this community." Like, it's all there. So it's just amazing. That's all. It's all there.
Yeah, well, I'll give you one that you may not have heard of, and I couldn't find it on Google, but um, the person who told me it was her grandparents this happened to. In Houston, Texas, after Brown versus Board of Education and the federal authorities demanding that schools integrate. At that time, people of Latino descent were, in terms of the census, were categorized as white. So there was no additional category. And so the authorities in Houston, the white authorities in Houston, forced thousands of Hispanic families to move so that the authorities in Houston could be in technical compliance with the orders from the Supreme Court, right? And it just goes to show that that white Americans have proven that we're willing to do anything it takes to maintain the white supremacist structures.
No question. No question.
And
They do that to a lot of people. They do that to Hispanics when they move in. Still to this day on the census, they do that to Arabs. They have them to mark white on their census. It's a proven fact. Now, obviously, that keeps the numbers up, keeps the majority, making sure it's the majority white. And there's been Arabs that have said, like, listen, I didn't want that. I don't want that. I don't consider myself white. So that happens, still is to this day.
yeah, well, and like you said, all of the various um, homeowner agreements, and right, like there's a lot of things in place still to this day in 2020 that are not even subtle in the racism expressed toward black people. And so it's like if I could get, I guess, a couple points home to white people. One, the shit is still happening. It's not, didn't end in 1965 because of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. When I did a study when I was in college, independent study on George Patton, and I was flipping through the congressional records. The school I went to had the full congressional records in the library, which is a fantastic resource. And I'm flipping through to get to P for Patton. And I start just noticing which words have the most entries. Like as I'm going through the M's, I'm like, oh, who would have known there was this many references to mud or mudslides or whatever. And as I'm getting through toward the P, I get to the N's. And I'm talking about like dozens of pages of entries of white Congress people using the N-word. Dozens of pages of entries. And I went through and read through some of them. It was just like, it was shocking. And I'm not all that easily shocked on this topic. And I wasn't even back then. But the idea that in 1964, a bunch of white members of Congress would use the N-word on the floor, and then by 1966, they were cured completely of racism is really a preposterous worldview. So one, white people, accept that this shit's still happening. Okay. Two, accept that it's not isolated, that it's pervasive. And three, do something about it. And that can be from the smallest thing, sharing a post on Facebook and asking your white friends to read it, to bigger things like trying to get people to sign petitions for change and actually showing up at your elected representatives' offices to speak and demand support. Certainly block walking and phone banking for candidates that aggressively favor, at long last, actual justice and basic fairness and decency for Black people in America. So one, admit it still goes on. Two, admit that the extent to it still goes on is not isolated, it's pervasive. And three, actually do something to try to fight against it. And so, Marland, I wonder if you have any other final thoughts before we carry on with our Saturdays, but I certainly really appreciate your time.
No, first of all, I appreciate you having me on. It's been fun. I know we've been trying to do this for a while. So, but as you say, if they sit back and admit it and make some try to fix it, I would say when you fix it, don't do what you did to the Civil Rights Bill. Don't add white women into it. Don't add gays and minorities and people of color. Just do it for Blacks, Native Black Americans, descendants of slavery here in America, you know, if you're going to do it here in America. So that's all I would say. Do it for Black people only. Like, stop right there.
And one other group, right?
Who's the other group?
The Indigenous Americans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
well, you know, and Indigenous, if you want to talk about even the Indians, you know, they got plenty of land that they don't even come off of now, you know, and they have a lot.
Like for example, we put them on a reservation in Oklahoma, and then we found oil on the reservation, and we go, oh, yeah. You gotta go. So we, you know, I mean,
that there goes back to what we talked about earlier. If capitalism seems to be more important than right or wrong or even somebody's lives. I mean, if that's what we're looking at, if it's evolved to that, maybe it didn't. Maybe it wasn't intended to start out that way, but if it has evolved to that, then it's something that needs to be done about that.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because so in terms of American citizens who are legitimately owed some form of reparation, you're talking about Black people who are direct descendants of enslaved human beings on American soil.
Or the foundation of Black Americans in the country.
You're talking about Indigenous Americans, Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about, in the Mexican War, we went and snatched about 1/3 of Mexico. So if there are Mexican Americans, no, Texas was a different deal though. That was a war for independence.
It was. I mean, before all the war started.
Well, but like Lorenzo de Zavala, Juan Antonio Seguin, that was not a white land grab. That was Mexican citizens uprising against a despot.
Oh.
Right? Versus the Mexican War was just a straight up land grab. And so if there are Mexican Americans who can trace their lineage to that era, and they had land taken from them during the Mexican, then that category of Mexican American would also be entitled to some form of reparations in my view. But it would be much more limited, right? Because we didn't do to, unfortunately, it's very hypocritical, but straight up, we're an anti-immigrant country. So every immigrant group that came here got screwed and had to sort of figure it out. And the difference is, though, that your ancestors weren't immigrants. Right. And that's a very important distinction to make. So I agree with you completely on affirmative action. And Dr. Gates at Harvard spoke up about this a couple years ago. He said that why is it that that the vast majority of people, of Black people at Harvard, their grandparents weren't born in America, right? So we're going to give that essentially any type of affirmative action type of program in admissions, it should be based on helping the people who our nation wronged directly, right? And so if you are a second generation immigrant from Nigeria, our nation did not directly harm you. And so Gates's point, which I agree with completely, and what you kind of spoke to yourself, is that if we're going to do this thing, let's not just make it a skin color thing. And let's not group all minority groups in. Let's limit it to the people whose families have been harmed deliberately for generations, rather than make it inclusive to the point that it gets almost watered down. Like, I don't, you don't see a whole bunch of Jack Yates graduates at Harvard. you do see a bunch of children of the Ugandan consulate to America who went to Exeter at Harvard. And I'm not against Ugandans being admitted to Harvard.
Right.
What I'm against is black people whose ancestors were enslaved in this country not having those opportunities.
Right.
I'm completely fine if they take all the Ugandans they want, as long as they're also accepting a fair and just and proportionate amount of people with black skin who this country specifically screwed, themselves and their families. So
I tell you, it's funny because as I remember, I spoke on Dr. Claude Anderson earlier. He always mentions like politics is always a part that has to go with the willingness ass will carry the heaviest load. And blacks have always been out front because we've always been the willingness ass almost to carry the heaviest load. And we've accepted a lot of that many times ourselves. But when it comes down to like even racism, let's talk about when we start talking about the foundation of Black Americans and how everything was started with that. And we start talking about reparations. Well, once Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America, and it was around 1488 is when there was 9 European nations raced over here to America in order to get, it was a contest, it was a race, it was a contest from Europe to come to America, similar to the Kentucky Derby, and they to get all the land, the resources, the tools, the materials that they could to develop the money and enrich themselves off of other people's labors. Now, who was those other people whose labor did they use? They used our labor. So we were enslaved, but those 9 European countries, European nations, raced over here in order to secure and get all the land resources, the materials, tools, and everything else, and to build the wealth. That's where the word racism came from. It was a race. So what those people did, it was about those European nations, when they came over here, it was about a race to get as much resources as you could for your particular group. So they took care of their group. That's where racism comes from, because they took care of their group. And if you start looking at it, that put us behind because they didn't give us a chance. And anytime we had a chance, they took it from us, right? So in a sense, racism was about taking care of your group or providing for your group, collecting as much as you could. Black people don't do that. When they did do it, it was taken from us. So it's more about what I say. Let me see. I'm at a loss of words right now. I'm at a loss of words right now. What I'm the word I'm looking for, but discrimination. A lot of things is about discrimination. It's all about power and control. A lot of it's about power and control. That's just where we're at right now. Everything is about power and control. The war. I mean, hell, why do we have more guns than people? And 5 United States can damn near fit into the continent of Africa, and you got this small place runs the world, and we put propaganda in every country we can, and if they don't go and do what we want them to do, we take them down for oil.
We could have a 7-hour podcast on that, but it's the number of times that we think of ourselves as this democratic. If you go back and look at what we did in Iran,
Huh?
And the reason we did it is because Iran had decided to nationalize their oil industry. And so the Brits and the Americans, we weren't having it. And
Right.
then in the 60s, the amount of murders and brutalizations that we ushered into Brazil because their president, elected president, in, I believe, the 1950s, possibly 60s, he was starting to buy, he was starting to develop a trading partnership with the Soviet Union. So the CIA took him out and installed a military dictatorship that set Brazil back by 100 years and caused the torture and the murder of untold thousands of Brazilians.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, again, a whole nother podcast, but you're damn right. The American government's done some really fucked up shit globally. It's like with Vladimir Putin. I actually ran into a guy who works for the Russian news agency last night, and I said, he said, we did not interfere in the 2016 election. I said, bullshit. Of course you did. But guess what? You've been trying to interfere in our elections since at least 1948. And we try to interfere in every single election we can. And China tries to interfere in every election that any country with resources is attempting to interfere in other nations' political processes. That's just the reality. It's not like that. Yeah. Like most of my liberal friends were outraged about. I said, this shit's been going on since 1948. At least the Russians have tried to meddle in every American election since at least 1948. And now all of a sudden, you're mad? You know, where you been?
Hey,
it's just
I'm
like,
with you.
You know, it's not even like, I couldn't be outraged. That's just how, like, welcome to how the world works. Powerful nations try to meddle in other nations' political processes, you know? So anyway, we literally could do politically, we could do another 7 podcasts. So, well, I'm going to go ahead and get rolling, and I want to get this up today because I promised to myself I was going to upload these interviews 50 days in a row.
Okay.
And I think that this is day 27.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
So I want to get it up. And the goal is 25 white coaches who talk to their black players about their experiences, and then 25 black people. I didn't want to do – because I know that it's like the reflexive disbelief white people have towards y'all. I knew if I just did 50 videos of only black people telling stories, every white person watching damn near would be like, oh, come on, that didn't really happen. Because it's like it's outside.
When they watch it.
Whereas if a white coach says, you know, like William Payne, Tweets by Coach P, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, really good dude, with an unbelievable story. One grandfather marched with King. One grandfather was in the KKK. Like, talk about a, you know, divergent freaking family situation.
Wow.
And he interviewed like 65 former black players, and 88% of them, college kids, had experienced at a minimum unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment at a minimum. And it's like when white people hear a white person give data like that, it can be received more easily than an anecdotal story from a black person. Because even with the cell phone videos, we still are like, well, what happened before they started recording? What? what did you not, you know? So anyway.
I get you.
Well, I appreciate you. I'm going to get this thing online right now, and we'll stay in touch. And thanks for sharing your thoughts. And one last thing.
Okay.
So we talk about white privilege. To me, a great example of white privilege is I'm allowed to hold any political opinion I please without my race being dragged into it. Whereas if a black man is more of a liberal, then a lot of white people on the right will say, oh, that's slave mentality. Democrats still got them on the plantation, right? And then if a white person is more conservative leaning, And a lot of white liberals will, oh, he hates himself. He's a self-loather. He's, or a black liberal might say Uncle Tom. And so I want to mention Thomas Sowell, because I really think it's awful that a black person is not allowed to have divergent political opinions. And so I want white liberals, but really anybody watching, to try to understand that you do have some fake black conservatives grifting based off of knowing they can sell books if they say things that make white racists feel justified in their racism. It's totally unfair to lump any black conservative in that group. It's not just unfair, but it's racist. Black people are allowed to have any thought they feel and express it any way they feel without their race being dragged into it. So I just wanted to point that out, because Thomas Sowell is no step and fetch it, Uncle Ruckus type of dude.
No doubt. Thomas Sowell is a very smart man. And
I just wanted to point that out, because that's something that it bothers me. It's not fair that, and it's not right that a black man expresses a political opinion and automatically, either way, their race gets dragged into the situation. I just think that's fucked up. This is an opinion of mine, so people may disagree, and I'm fine with that, as long as we can have dialogue about it. I believe that we have been blacks. First of all, I'll say this: liberals scare me as a black man. Liberals scare me. I'm okay with conservatives. Liberals are black liberals in particular. They kind of make me nervous. And black people don't believe that they believe that they're liberal and they're not conservative. But let's talk about we've been brainwashed by default. When you look at it, blacks believe in guns, believe in gun ownership. Blacks are heavy into religion. Blacks are okay with abortions. They believe in abortions, and they believe in low taxes. If black people think about it, that's conservative. Those are conservative views. And I'm not for either side, to be honest with you. I'm an independent, but I take good and bad from both sides. I watch and see what I can learn from both sides, from all sides. That's just me. But I get nervous about black liberals, to be honest with you. They usually work for somebody else. Well, I'll say this. And I've had this conversation with so many white conservatives over the years, because the white conservatives earnestly feel that, well, the only reason that the blacks vote Democrat is because Democrats promise them all the free stuff, right? Well, 58% of American black people receive zero government benefits. So if free stuff is what's motivating black people to mostly vote Democrat, well, 58% aren't getting free stuff. So what the fuck are you talking about? That's one.
Right.
And then two, and I try to get them to understand this. So what you just did, Mr. White Conservative, is you said black people are too stupid to understand their own interests. And here's a news flash. When you habitually insult a group of people and call them stupid, they're not going to fucking like you very much.
No question.
It's the same way with the white liberals on MSNBC talking about rural white people not understanding their own interests. So, of course, rural white people fucking hate the coastal elites, the talking heads on MSNBC. You're not going to be well received by telling someone you think that they're stupid. And you're right that on cultural issue, the 3 G's, as they say, God, gays, and guns, right? There are plenty of, in terms of philosophically, on the social issues.
Right.
There are tons of black people philosophically better aligned with Republican than with Democrat. But Republicans are such overt, hostile, racist assholes that most black people are going to go, I'm with them on a lot of the shit, but fuck them. I can't vote for that fucking prick, that racist prick. And if
Right.
white Republicans could collectively convince themselves to shut the fuck up and quit being so overtly publicly racist all the time,
Mhm.
you would see the split. You would see the shift rather quickly, because you look at the platform, and you're right. Of course, there are plenty of philosophical black conservatives. Why wouldn't there be? Right? Black people aren't monolithic in thought or philosophy, and if you think they are, you're fucking racist as fuck. You know, like the. So anyway, it's interesting you brought that up, because, I mean, I've literally had that. I've had that conversation with GOP political operatives.
Uh-huh.
And no, you're an overtly hostile, racist fuck. Why would a black person want to vote for your ass? Like when you know, it's like the another friend of mine who's one of the smartest people I know. He said, Pete, I'll sum it up like this: Democrats call us the N-word at a lower volume and a less impolite tone. Right? It's not like black people think Democrats have their best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, like, y'all know white people pretty fucking well by this point. You know, you guys aren't being bamboozled.
Actually, they are. Actually, we are, Pete. We don't feel people like
I'm
it.
not saying there are no people who get bamboozled.
Yeah, right.
On average, the vast majority of my black friends who consistently vote Democrat, they do not think Democrats are looking out for them.
Right.
They just know that the racism in the Republican Party is more overt, more hostile. So it's not like good versus bad. It's like really bad versus very bad. You know what I mean?
That is a great point. That's a great point. Like, that's a great point. I look at it like this, man, and I think to me, Malcolm X said it. He illustrated it tremendously. He talked about the difference between the wolf and the fox. Okay, he says the conservative is more like the wolf. They're going to come in. They're going to go to the chicken, and they're going to try to kill as many as they can, and not pretend. They know who they are. There's a wolf, and they're going to get it. Well, the liberal is a fox. They're going to come into the chicken farm, to coop. They're going to be friendly with the chickens. They're not going to kill them or anything. Then they're going to leave. So then next time they come out, they done fooled the chickens into believing that, oh, that's that fox. He's a good one. He's on our side. And now guess what? That's what the chicken does. He brings his friend out. He brings another friend out. And then and now guess what? The fox has his whole pick and he slaughters them all. I mean, the fox has his whole pick and he slaughters them all. And that's kind of what I looked at. And it's, to me, Malcolm X made a great point when he said the difference between the conservative and the liberal. The conservative is a wolf. You know who they are. You know what they want. They don't hide their prejudice. They don't hide that. So therefore, right at the beginning, you know how to work with them. It's going to be quid pro quo. You do for me, I do for you. But now the fox is a lot slicker. And he fools us all the time into really thinking that he's doing something for us. And we believe that that's who we have to follow. And at the end of the day, you're not getting anything in return, but you're losing. You're losing a lot of benefits on the other end. So that's just, I thought Malcolm X put that brilliantly back in the 60s, man. It still resonates to this day. And I don't think that a lot of black people are aware of what's going on. And it's like, if I know that this guy doesn't like me, I'm okay with that. I don't have to deal with him. But if there's some negotiation that needs to go down, I want to negotiate with this guy because I know who he is and what you want this is what I want. What do we have to do to make it happen? Strom Thurmond, as I said before, was a racist, but Dr. Claude Anderson got in there and helped him to get 3 or 4 black federal judges appointed. Just simple as that. You can go back to doing what you do, Strom. We did quid pro quo. You did for me. I did for you. I got what I want out of it. You get what you want. Let's go back to business. I don't think the liberals are like that.
The wolf and the fox analogy is a fair one. I just in my view, as a man, there's not a fox in the world that can kill me, whereas a wolf can. So
I get that.
And my experience is, again, my group of, if I were going to say my 10 closest black friends in the world, I don't think any of those 10 trust the Democrats. I think it's just simply, literally a matter of the lesser evil. And I'm not saying that And we can disagree about who actually is the lesser evil.
No, I got you. Guess
But-
what, Peter? I'm cool with that. I'm like this, and we've done this and we've said this for years. I don't know. I know it happens, but I don't hear Arabs saying that. I don't hear Chinese saying that. I don't hear Hispanics saying that. The lesser, it's black people that usually say the lesser of the two evils, and more than anyone else anyway. And to me, it's like evil is evil. So how can you consciously vote for evil if you know it's evil? That's just how I'm looking at. Like, figure out a way to go do something else. But to consciously vote for it, and your kids see that you're consciously voting for evil or the lesser of an evil, you're telling your kids that it's okay to accept evil, you know? And so that's why I say, to me, it's hard for me to consciously say that I'm going to vote for a lesser of an evil. I figure out, you know what, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to see who's going to really give me the best thing, who's going to tell me something that's going to benefit me, where I can help myself and my family to grow, in my community, and people who look like me to continue to enhance and evolve. And honestly, both of these candidates that's about to be running right now, it's hard to say, man. But I'm not a Trump hater either. I'm just gonna say that.
Well,
I'm not a lover either.
We've talked about this on Facebook. Like, we're just not quite aligned. Because I look at the Supreme Court picks, and the Trump picks a guy to head the EPA who hates protecting the environment.
Yes.
Trump picks a girl to run public schools who hates public education. Like, he's putting people in charge of things that they hate. And so, like, Biden, the way I'm looking at it, Marlon, is Team Biden versus Team Trump.
Right.
Biden's going to have a better team around him. Like, most of Trump's stronger picks, whether you're talking about Kelly or Maddox or Tillerson, most of his strong independent picks who would stand up to him and say, yo, you're way out of line and you don't know what you're talking about. Like, they're all gone. And so now he's got a very sycophantic team around him, which I think is dangerous. So
I agree. I totally agree.
So that's my thing. And I don't. So Malcolm X, of course, called black people chumps for voting Democrat. But he wasn't calling for black people to vote Republican. He was calling for black people to boycott the vote.
Absolutely.
So that Democrats would have to really
turn your vote
with. And
Republicans.
And I'm not against that philosophy. It's just that I would totally sound like what King called the white moderate. I mean, but like the classic white moderate thing to say, but now's not the time. But I just want the record to reflect, I swear on my mother and everything holy, if George W. Bush was the nominee, right? If George W. Bush was the nominee or Mitt Romney was the nominee, I wouldn't say that. And I know it's classic. Like, that's what white people always fucking say.
That is a good one.
And I swear that it's because I really do feel that this narcissist is unusually dangerous. I'm not so anyway.
I got a good friend of mine, right? And we talk all the time, and he is a world history buff, like world history. And I'm telling you, you just repeated our conversation we had about 2.5 weeks ago. He's like, I know this and that, but Lowe, if I got to tell you, now is not the time. I say, see, what happened when we sit out? They got to show us. I know, but trust me, now is not the time. And I said, okay. So that's what we'll be saying in 4 years from now.
if RBG dies and Trump puts in the amount of things that could, like, the Supreme Court's already starting to gut the voting rights. You know what I mean? So it's just like I hate saying that because, like, again, if in 2012 or 8 or 4 or 0 or 96, if black people if they'd gone with in a large percent the Malcolm X plan,
right.
You guys are just saying some decent things during the election, and you're helping us a little bit, or at least you're not overtly harming us as badly as the other side might. If black people said, fuck it, we're not showing up, well, no Democrat can win. No Democrat can win. And
No
so
doubt.
that really would force, like you look in Congress, the percent, and it's changing. I promise if they did the poll, like like for example, 2 years ago, 38% of white Democrats were against removing monuments to traitorous losers who fought to uphold evil.
Right.
38% of Democrats. Now it's only 12% of Republicans were against it. Right. So that's like, again, lesser of two evils, right? I think if you did the same poll today, I bet you that white Democrats who oppose removing those monuments, I bet it would be down in like the 15% range, maybe even lower.
You for removing those monuments?
Fuck yes, every last one of them.
Okay.
Every last one of them. But I'm a primary legacy guy. So to be clear on this topic, I'm a primary legacy guy. Robert E. Lee has a somewhat complicated legacy. He wrote a widely publicized letter criticizing the institution of slavery before the Civil War even broke out. Robert E. Lee toured the nation telling people in the South, don't build statues to me. We lost. And if God had been on our side, we wouldn't have lost. And so we lost, and it's time to reintegrate into the United States of America. So he's got a somewhat complicated legacy. But his primary legacy is leading a failed, treasonous uprising to uphold evil.
Absolutely.
Primary legacy.
That's not talked about. That's not talked about.
The statue's got to go, right? But I look at like a James Madison, who was an enslaver, right? And so, of course, not cool with that. His primary legacy is he's the father of the Constitution and the fourth president. So I don't think we need to rename James Madison University. Now, I'm not going to be upset if they did. I'm not going to fight like hell to keep the name James Madison. But that's my own thoughts on that issue. Primary legacy. Like, look at Gandhi. Gandhi was probably a pedophile. Okay, he slept with naked underage girls. Now, he said it was a test of his will and discipline, and that he never did it. But there's a pretty decent chance that that man was a pedophile, and that is horrible.
Right.
It's not his primary legacy. His primary legacy is he led the Indian subcontinent to independence from the British Empire. And so the monuments to Gandhi, I don't think need to be torn down, even though, MLK was a serial, he cheated on Coretta a lot. But that's not his primary legacy. His primary legacy is leading a massive movement to force America to live up to our ideals. That's his primary legacy. So it's like every great man did bad things. The question is, what is their primary legacy to me? Like, that's my own view on the topic of monuments. So every single Confederate needs to go. But like, I'll give you an example. They renamed Lanier Middle School, where my mother was. Lanier Middle School, HISD, where my mother was.
Westheimer.
HISD, yep. It was named after Sidney Lanier. Okay. His primary legacy is he was a poet, a famous poet. When he was 16 years old, he was drafted to be a private in the Confederate Army. So I don't think that Lanier needed to be changed because his primary legacy was, but then you look at Nathan Bedford Forrest, Robert E. Lee, P.T. Beauregard, and so like Dowling. None of these men deserve to be honored because their primary legacy was fighting a traitorous, like America's supposed to value winning. They were losers. America's supposed to value righteousness. They were evil. America's supposed to value patriotism. They were traitors. So how the fuck do they deserve to be honored?
I agree.
Based on primary legacy,
They were the first ones to go to war against this country.
Right.
People don't talk about that. But so let me hit you on this. I know you got to run. Supreme Court was put in place to keep the American rules and the Constitution the way it is. That's why the Supreme Court was there. Those judges were put to keep everything in place. And I agree with regardless of who is elected there, put in place by whether Democrats or Republicans, that's what they were there for, to keep everybody in order, to keep us in place. Okay, keep the law of the land. Cool. Whether they're racist or not, but it was set up from a racist perspective. The monuments, I get what you're saying on that. I do. But I personally, I'm like, keep your horse, keep your Lee if you give me free taxes for the rest of my life. Keep your street name if I can get free taxes for the rest. Keep your street name if I can get, like you said, give me those loans that I had. You know, give me the land back that I had or things of that nature. Give me something tangible is what I say. Taking that down is a symbolic victory. I want something tangible. I need something that I can count or measure, something that I can leave to my children and my grandchildren and so forth on down the line. If we just take down a statue, I can sit back and what am I going to say? Hey, grandfather or dad was a part of something, a legacy that removed a statue. But tomorrow I wake up in the same position. No small business loans, no PPP, no land. I look at it from that perspective, but I get and I know that those were not good people. I'm okay. So, but now I would say this: if they're gonna keep the statute, put an amendment to it. Put he did this. You know, Washington or Jefferson was this, that, and that. But you know what? He owned slaves and he did this, and let everybody know the bad things he did too. So put that right next to it, so everybody can know. Oh yeah, he was on some bull. He might have helped us in this war, but he was a bad dude. Look at,
I have no problem adding plaques.
Yeah,
Two statues to Jefferson, Washington, Madison.
Yeah,
to place into context.
Yeah,
I have zero issue with that.
That's all I say. I just say this because all this communication that's going on, with everybody doing this and doing that. I'm just like, man, put me, Marland Lowe, put me on your board. But not just that. Let me talk about it. But if you can't do that, give me something tangible. Give me something that we can make up for some things that have been wrong over these years in this system. Because we need to break this system and give us a chance to catch up. That's it. If you told me, Marlon, I'll give your family 30 million, your family 30 million, and now move your ass out this country. Since you want this 30 million, let us have it to ourselves. You know what I'll do? I'll take the 30 million and I'm gone. You can have it. Just give me something that I can help build somewhere else.
One of the reasons why I enjoy talking with you is because you are an outside the box guy. And it would have been fascinating to hear the Republican reaction if the Congressional Black Caucus said, we'll make a trade right now. You can keep your statues and we get reparations. And it would have been fascinating to watch the Republicans squirm.
Yeah.
That they're like, well, hey, we're happy to, like, hey, you know, and I did not hear anyone else talking about that. And like the same thing with, like, I always tell my white liberal friends who like you would like to see the Second Amendment altered or possibly even abolished. And I always tell my white liberal friends, this is easy. All you got to do is establish a GoFundMe with enough money to buy an AR-15 for every black man in America. And you'll see the Second Amendment changed in a heartbeat.
In a heartbeat.
And
when you start talking about amendments, you also got to remember being so many of them, so many things, because what you're doing is great. And it causes it brings such great dialogue and makes people just think totally. Like the 13th Amendment, people don't talk about that. It still talks about slavery. You know, they can lock you up. If you're locked up, you're considered a slave of the state. You're considered a slave. So all that's still there. People just don't see it. They don't look it up. They don't research it. And it's just these 13, 14, these amendments are something else if you just read into it. But we just haven't done it.
You know, you're absolutely right that now these days it's way below minimum wage, but I'm not aware of any states that don't compensate prisoners for labor. Now it might be 72 cents an hour, right? And I firmly, like, if I were king, I'd love to be king. I'd hate to be president. I'd be a terrible president because I'd be like, I would have Trumpian instincts of like, this senator's fucking shit up. Let's go get him. You know, bag his ass up and let's get it, you know. But if I were king, I would pay inmates the federal minimum wage, and I would also charge them for the food and the housing like that. I would not necessarily put that on John Q. taxpayer. But I would pay them a legitimate wage. I don't think it's fair that we don't.
It's not. But not most of them shouldn't be even in there. But let's talk about why a lot of these private prisons. Look it up when you get a chance. A lot of those they get $60,000 a year per prisoner. Per prisoner, plus a bonus per prisoner. So that's great incentive to keep people locked up.
Now, private prisons are and we've already seen cases break of CEOs of private prison systems bribing local judges to give longer sentences. Like the notion that no business should exist where that business has an incentive to see people lose their freedom.
No question.
That should 100 million % never have been privatized to begin with. And now you've got them with lobbyists and they're always pushing for longer and longer. And like you said, people prioritize capitalism over right and wrong.
No question. And it's the same thing with these vaccines that's going on right now too. The Bail-Dole Act, BAHYL/DOLE, Dole. It made those universities have opportunity to copyright and is it copyright or what's the other word? Not copyright, but basically have ownership of the language that they put in for these scientists and vaccines. And now that's why people have saying science has been altered now, because they only push it forward if they can have their name on it so that they can reap benefits from it. I think that went through in 1983. So it's all be turning to capitalism, man. It's all about money. And because they changed these rules, a lot of these scientists are doing things to make sure that their name is on it. Even if someone else, a colleague pushes a theory to them or a thesis to them that is good information, if they're not going to get credit for it, they don't push it through because they're not going to get paid for it. And that's tough. And that's where we are right now. It talks about a lot of these vaccines that's going on and science that's going on. They say science hasn't been what it is in a long time, unfortunately, because people they're benefiting from their names being able to be put on these and these colleges are benefiting from it. When you get a chance, look that up. You'll get a chance. You'll see it. It's amazing.
No, the pharmaceutical industry and you routinely see unnecessary procedures being ordered by doctors because by doing the
another story, man.
Get paid. And it's an entire other can of worms. But I want to get this thing up, so
okay.
To sign off. But Marland Lowe, good to catch up as always. You always have a very unique perspective, and I appreciate the dialogue with you over the course of many years. We've kind of been at this for a while.
No question.
And we tend to agree about 2/3 of the time, but the 1/3 of the time we don't agree, I don't ever recall us getting upset with each other or trying to cancel each other or so it's important to keep I think civil disagreements between friends are extremely healthy emotionally, but also in terms of you need to exercise your brain like you do any other part of your body. And civil debates and disagreements are very good as well. So my friend, great to catch up. And,
absolutely.
Soon.
Take it easy.
Okay.